All right, so church government and women in ministry, super long chapter. I hope you were able to get through it. Hope you broke it up a little bit.
I appreciated the flow charts.
Yeah, that helps.
Really well done.
Right.
Actually, I kind of
anytime
the flow charts and my answers.
Anytime you get a visual, that helps quite a bit. Yeah. So that was good. So we got a lot of ground to cover, but hopefully we'll get to everything that you want to get to. And again, this, as far as the women in ministry part of this, that is a big issue today. And I would say it's probably the biggest issue, both practically in the church worldwide, as well as it's a big theological issue, because the theological issue of that has there been a submission in the Trinity eternally? So there are actually, there's really good guys on both sides, men and women on both sides, theologians that don't believe. There are some people who believe that the Trinity only temporarily had submission when Jesus came to earth and submitted to the Father, and that so it was a temporary thing. But there are theologians that don't believe that existed eternally. And then there are theologians like Grudem, and I agree with Grudem, that there's always been submission in the Trinity. So that's a hot debate right now. I would say it's probably the biggest hot debate among theology that is out there today. There might be one that is more pressing than that, but as far as I know, that's probably the big one today, the hot topic. And there's big disagreement and big debate on that. And again, that relates to the role of men and women in ministry, in the home, and in the church.
And I think that some of the other debates that are major debates in theology today are tied into that one.
Yeah, so again, but it does come down to, there are theologians that think, and I agree with them, that the Trinity is the basis of all relationships. Anything that involves relationships flows from the Trinity. And so your understanding of the Trinity, of course, is going to make a difference in how you view earthly relationships. So, big issue, and again, we'll dive into it a little bit today. All right, so as we look at page 203 in the workbook and 1114 in the systematic theology, the first thing he addresses is church government. And the very first question is, how does church government differ from doctrines like the Trinity and substitutionary atonement? And I think the last time we were together, it might have been, I don't know, it was sometime recently, I said that all major essential doctrines flow out of the gospel. Okay, so again, when you talk about the Trinity, that's a gospel issue. Obviously, the nature of Christ, the work of the Holy Spirit. Christ would relate to the atonement. What did you say, Cordy?
The virgin birth.
Yeah, that would relate to the doctrine of Christ, his deity, his humanity, and so forth. But again, we said that what are essentials for a church? And we said that anything that pertains to the gospel would be grade A, top priority doctrines. Now this, church government and women in ministry, wouldn't fall under this category.
Well, the way he put it was, it's not a major doctrine.
Right.
There's room in the church universal for different styles or systems of government.
Yeah. And again, it's probably one of the areas where there's been more differences, and yet it's okay, because there can be an Episcopalian style of government, or a Presbyterian, or Baptist, or a congregational that sometimes functions really well. Again, a lot of it depends on who the leaders are. It's like, because you could have a plurality of elders like I think a plurality of elders with sort of like what we have is the best I've seen, and since I've been in ministry in 40 years. I think the way we function is better than anything I've experienced. However, it all stands or falls on who the leaders happen to be. And you can have the same system we do, but you have crummy leaders, or people that aren't regenerate or whatever leading, and then you're in trouble. So yeah. So again, this, he would say that this isn't an essential. I would say though that, for instance, like for me, women in ministry is an essential because it reflects the Trinity. So I would say that what goes on in the home, what goes on in the church, especially a marriage, that is a Trinitarian, the relationships in these institutions are Trinitarian in nature, so therefore it is, I think, really important that we understand what those roles are. All right, so let's go to the next one. He said define church officer, and he said what other often used terms are included in this broad category according to Grudem. So church officer is someone who has been publicly recognized as having the right and responsibility to perform certain functions for the benefit of the whole church. And then what were some of the other terms that he used for church officers?
Well, like deacon, elder,
right.
Bishop.
Right. Yeah, some churches have trustees.
Yeah.
Some have...
church moderator.
Yeah, church moderator.
Presbyters, shepherds,
Right.
overseers, pastors.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different terms that are used. And again, then when you bring in the Catholic Church this Sunday, tomorrow, our lesson and deeper dive is on was Peter the first Pope, and the whole idea of apostolic succession. So again, these issues run deep. There's a lot of debate and so forth on this. But again, the important thing about this is he talked about one of the, we'll get to it in a second, but one of the models is having no infrastructure. The church is just run by, I've never experienced that. I could imagine that'd be pretty chaotic, and very subjective. But wow, that would be scary. As a pastor, it would be terrifying to
Buddhism.
go into a church like that. Yeah, where there's just no infrastructure, and hey, let's just be in tune with the Holy Spirit. And a lot of your decision making would be based on whether you have a stomach ache that day or a headache, or it's like, I don't know, pretty crazy.
Was that, do you akin to like Quakerism?
I don't know. Again, to me, that a model like that would probably be more Pentecostal, charismatic. The higher church models, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, Anglican, Roman Catholic, those churches tend to be less. How do I want to say it? I want to be careful about this because this would be a generality, but I think in general, they tend to focus on what they can control.
Yeah.
Like to give you an example, when I was in India, there was very much this, all the churches that I was involved with in India were very in tune with the work of the Holy Spirit. And they didn't have a lot of money, they didn't have buildings, they didn't have technology. So when they read the book of Acts, it was like, they expected what happened in the book of Acts to happen there. Whereas here in America or in Europe, we tend to have money, we have buildings, we have resources, we have technology, so we tend to lean more on the skills of the human than on the work of the Spirit. And both of them can be extremes, where I think both are good, they can be good. But again, the danger of a higher church, a higher church order, a hierarchy where there's a lot of functionality of the people, is less dependency on the Holy Spirit is the danger there.
Now, I was thinking about this driving over. A lot of those higher church models are more sacerdotal than like what we do here.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, that only the priest or only the higher ups can do certain things. Again, in our church, we try to give as much freedom as possible to everyone. Life groups can do communion, and if you lead someone to Christ, you can. Even if you don't lead, if someone is a good friend and you want to be with them in the baptismal, we're good with that. There's nothing special about me doing a baptism per se. It's just a believer with somebody who's being baptized is the way we look at it. Because again, the act itself, we don't believe bestows grace. And there's nothing in the person doing it that bestows grace, where that would be different in the higher authoritarian type ministries. Yeah. Okay, number 3 was many other people exercise gifts in the church, but we do not say that they have an office because they do not need formal public recognition for their gifts to function. So again, that's sort of like what I was just saying. In our church, our hope for everybody who comes to our church is that everybody would use their gifts. If you're a Christian, you have a spiritual gift. And so we want everybody to use those gifts. We benefit from your gifts, you benefit from our gifts. The more people that function, and again, that is a danger of a hierarchical structure. Like in the Catholic Church, I bet most people aren't even expected to use. I don't even know how they talk about spiritual gifts in a Catholic church, unless it's more charismatic. There are some charismatic churches, and they probably would emphasize that. But in general, it's sort of like, hey, we pay the priest to do this stuff, or. So again, in a Protestant church, in most Protestant churches, there's an expectation that everybody is going to use their gifts and help develop the infrastructure and ministry of the church. Okay, then he talked about apostleship. And so again, it might have been confusing on this question because he distinguishes between the uses of apostle on page 203 and then on page 204, the qualifications. So hopefully you got the difference between those two. But first of all, what are the 2 uses of the word apostle in Scripture? So again, the term apostle, what does that mean?
Well, one is kind of lowercase, meaning messenger or sent one.
Okay, yeah.
And the other is a specific office of the first century church.
Yeah.
People who had seen the risen Christ.
Yeah.
Who had been commissioned specifically by Christ.
Good.
I think he used the word pioneer missionary too.
Yeah. Yeah, pioneer missionary or church planner. So in some I think in Pentecostal churches, in some cases they call their church planners apostles. And I've heard people refer to themselves as apostles. And having an apostolic calling.
It's good to know.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I would say a better term to use for those people who think of themselves that way today would be a pioneer missionary or a church planner. But there's people that have that gift. I mean, there's a few people I know of that they plant churches and they're really good at it, but they're not good at staying there. It's like they can get it started, sort of like an entrepreneurial type spirit, where they can get the thing started, but oftentimes those guys are the worst guys to stay there. And so there are some people that actually go in to, overseas or even here in America, and they'll start, several churches in their lifetime, and they're good at it. And that's hard. I mean, that's a tough thing. Ask Pastor Jim about that. But it's you definitely, I think, have to have a calling and a gift to be able to do that. But again, he would say that in the broad sense, today, you have what's similar to what apostles did back then as far as their ministry, but as far as their calling, in the narrow sense, there are no apostles today. Okay?
Unless you're a Mormon.
Yeah. All right, on page 5, what were the qualifications for being an apostle?
Eyewitness of the resurrection and commissioned by Christ.
Yeah, eyewitness of the resurrection and commissioned by Christ. So, was the Apostle Paul an apostle?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Did he see Christ?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he did. Now
And
again,
blind for 3 days.
exactly. Yeah. 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 So again, and there's in the Catholic Church again, they believe in apostolic succession. Now, just in reference to this, and what the qualifications are, what would be the problem with apostolic succession?
Seeing the risen Christ.
Yeah, and commissioned by
Commissioned.
Christ. So really,
Commissioned, yeah.
right there is no apostolic succession, okay? Now, there's other reasons why we don't believe there's apostolic succession as well, but those are two pretty big ones because those are the two that we see in the New
So how do
Testament.
they justify it?
You'll have to ask them. Yeah, you'll have to ask them. I really don't know.
Power,
Yeah.
because I said so.
Okay, number 6. Are there only 12? Are only the 12 disciples of Jesus apostles?
No, we just talked about that.
Okay.
Paul was.
Yeah. So Paul. Who else did he make a case for that were apostles? Barnabas, James. Yeah, and then possibly others. You know.
I would think that if Stephen had lived longer, he would have been one.
Yeah, could be. Yeah. Yeah. So again, there was probably more than 12. There was more than 12. But again, whether there were more than 15 or not, we don't know for sure. But again, apostolic succession would be unlikely because eyewitness of the resurrection and commissioned by Christ. All right, number 7, in place of living apostles present in the church to teach and govern it, we have instead the writings of the apostles in the books of the New Testament. So, you know, you've probably run into people like this before where they say, well, you know, when God speaks to me, or I'm waiting to hear from God, or, you know, things like that. And I just think that's a really poor understanding of what divine revelation is. You know, that you and I actually have access 24/7 to God speaking to us in His Word. And I'll take that any day over somebody coming to me and saying, hey, this is a word from God for you. I mean, it may be, but it probably isn't in most cases. And especially if it's like an oracle of doom. You know, some people think they have the spiritual gift of criticism. And for one, I don't think criticism is a gift. Yeah, and it's definitely not a spiritual gift. But again, there are churches that really emphasize God speaking to you audibly or seeing Christ, and I would be very suspect of anything like that. Although I think it is possible. You know, when you hear about Muslims today, when you read about Muslims that are being saved around the world, many of them are seeing visions or having dreams of Jesus, and it's sort of like the proof's in the pudding. You know, I look at spiritual gifts. You know, we're going to be talking a lot about spiritual gifts in some upcoming chapters that are even controversial. But one thing I would always say with anybody who says they have a message from God, or they have a gift that's controversial, is really watch to see that they're not prideful. I think if you're prideful, that's a manifestation of the flesh and not the Spirit. And is it giving glory to that person, or is it giving glory to Christ? Another thing. So the ultimate person that uses spiritual gift for me is a person that really you don't even know that much about. But if they're missing, you know they're missing, because it makes a difference. So we have people, like if Charlie wasn't here or Amanda wasn't here to record, we wouldn't have videos, you know. So they're doing something that hardly anybody knows about, especially almost everybody watching doesn't know who's videoing it. But without the time they take to do that, load it, it takes time, and you have to edit it. So that's using a gift, the gift of helps, to be able to make something that's benefiting people possible. And There's people that do sound, video, and so forth at church. Ushers that help people find a seat or find where they're. Those are all super important ministries. But again, they're ministries where we're not putting these people up on stage and giving them a hand every week and saying thank you, thank you, thank you. Although, it wouldn't be bad to do that every once in a while, because sometimes you feel like what you're doing is insignificant. But the reality is, when you're doing things for the glory of God and you're doing it because God wants you to do it, that benefits you and it benefits the church.
Think of the host team.
Yeah.
All the people that
Yeah.
are volunteering their time.
Right.
And encouraging people and greeting people.
Yeah.
And loving on people. I mean,
Yeah.
that is so
And people get followed up, with a phone call. It makes a big difference. We have a lot of people. We just had a pastor's luncheon on last Sunday, and everybody said, this church is so warm. This church is so friendly. We're back because we just felt at home here. We had several people say, we felt the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
We walked in and we felt the power of the Holy Spirit. Okay, that's really cool, So,
One thing
yeah.
I know I've shared with y'all is that when we're using our spiritual gifts, people are amazed at how well somebody's using that gift. But the person who's letting the spiritual gift be used, it's like, well, it's not a big deal. Because it's so
They're gifted to do that.
It's
Yeah.
gifted.
Right.
It's not a big deal.
Yeah, it's like driving a car, right? When you first drive a car, you're trying to figure out, am I got the mirror right? Am I shifting correctly? And before you know it, now we all get in we don't even think about what we're doing. It's just all natural. I think it's the same with spiritual gifts. That it becomes it's something that's supernatural,
Yeah.
that becomes sort of
When people tell
second
me
nature.
how amazing I am at being a host for a life group, and I'm going, what do you mean? This is no big deal.
Yeah, and again.
It's no big deal.
And the point is, though, I think with a lot of people, like when I've had people say they're an apostle or something, in my experience, there's an arrogance and a pridefulness about saying that, And I like it when I see somebody doing something that's really important, but it's no big deal to them. And yet it's benefiting so many other people. That's what I love to see. And a church that's full of that is going to make a huge difference. But a church that's really promoting one gift over others, or, if you don't do this, you're not spiritual or whatever, that's very dangerous and carnal, I think.
And it just causes so much angst in those
Yeah.
people who don't have that particular gift that's being pushed.
Right. Guilt. Yeah, it causes guilt and anxiety and
And like, oh, I must be so bad.
Right.
I thought I was bad before, but this makes it worse.
Okay, number 8 was what is the consistent pattern of the main governing group in New Testament churches?
Plural elders.
Yeah, plural elders. So again, I think it's impossible not to see that. If you read the New Testament in its entirety, you'll see this over and over again. And that's why, when I came to this church, most Baptist churches have the model where there's a single elder pastor, and then you have the congregation under that or over that. It depends on the church. But the danger of that is what happens if the pastor sins in a big way, like embezzles money from the church or commits adultery or whatever. It really affects the church big time, because now you don't have anybody to really take that person's place. And it breaks the trust for those who are left behind of that model, because it's like, well, what if this happens again? Okay? So it's a poor model for a lot of reasons, I think. But again, when I came to our church almost 10 years ago, I told our board, our existing board at the time, which was just a board of deacons, I said, one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to take the time to sort of watch and see who the men are that are sort of the cream of the crop of leadership in our church, and I'm going to train them to be elders. And eventually we're going to have an elder board and a deacon board. And that took about 5 years to be able to make that happen. And then to actually implement it took another few years. So we've only had an elder board and elder and deacon board for about 4 years now.
And you rotate people in and out?
Yeah, we rotate people in and out. And again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to have a biblical, what the Bible models. Again, there's some freedom in that, but we're trying to adhere closely to the biblical model of having male elders and deacons that we believe, and even makes the case here, and we make the case for it, that we can have male and female deacons. But even in the deacon board, like the chairman and the vice chairman are always going to be men, because again, they're the ones that are actually leading the deacons. So we try to model what we see in the Trinity in our boards and in our marriages. And again, as best as we can, it's never perfect, but you're trying to adhere to that. But again, in a plurality, what's nice is, like even now, with Tyron leaving, he's been a huge blessing as an elder, and his wife as well, with the gift of hosting and prayer. And she's a deaconess as well. He's an elder. So with them moving, that's a big hole to fill, and they're like having another pastor on staff and wife on staff. So that's a big hole to fill. But again, we can't just call out two people and another couple in the church and say, fill in for Tyron and Cindy, because they have their unique gifting as well as a couple. And so we're going to miss that. We're going to, that's going to create a leadership gap in our church until God provides for that. But again, to then just fill in, just say we need to put a position here in the elder board and in the deacon board and just pick people to fill that role without that gifting doesn't work. So, but when we have a plurality, the goal is always to have more than one, deacon, more than one elder. Right now we're down to 3 elders, and so that's not ideal. We'd like to have more. But again, if you don't have qualified elders, what are you going to do?
Who are the elders right now?
Right now, it's just me, Jim, and Mike. Yeah.
Well, after next month when Tyron.
Yeah, well, he hasn't really been functioning for a while. He's been, busy. But again, that's something to just always pray for as a church, is we want to have gifted, qualified leaders, because we can do more. We can minister more the more leaders we have. So right now we've got 2 elders that one, Scott Enbaum, who's always typically an elder, but he's off this year, so he'll come back on next year. And then we have another guy that I'm training to be an elder for next year as well. So anyway. No.
Okay.
Yeah, not until it's announced. Yeah. But anyway, the plurality. What's good about a plurality? Is that somebody's car?
Thanks.
Oh, okay. The good thing about a plurality is you have different guys that can preach. You have different guys that can teach. You have different guys that can lead groups and shepherd groups. Did it stop? Okay. And you also have, it doesn't fall on me. So if I die, everything keeps going, because you have a plurality of people that are already preaching, already leading, already teaching, already shepherding. And so, you're down one, but you still can keep functioning. Where if you have just one guy that everybody's looking at, and that guy goes down, now you're in trouble. So there's a lot of good reasons. And then one of the hopes, one of the goals is that one of the things we emphasize in our membership class, and that's why one of the reasons I encourage everyone to become a member, is that whatever we're doing, like with your ministry, with any ministry that we have, we're mentoring or equipping others to do the same kind of thing. Because we have that gift, we have that skill. We're also we're always looking for people to replace us or give us a break. Sometimes it's good to take a break, And we like that as a church. We believe in rest and taking vacations and so forth. I think we all need that. So this helps you to do that, where if you only have one guy, that you burn that guy out. You end up burning people out.
And that's maybe why the average lifespan of a pastor in a church is like less than 5 years.
The keys, it was our car. So
To what?
Somebody must have tried to get in or something.
In our car?
Yeah.
Huh.
I broke my horn, so I had the great gift of knowing how to beat a lot. So many times I broke my horn.
It lost it lived its life.
All right. So, and then number 9 is, what are the other names used for elders in the New Testament?
Well, we kind of looked at that earlier.
Yeah, so pastors, bishops, overseers, shepherds, teachers, and so forth. So again, it seems that the elders, these 2 roles are really caring for people spiritually, teaching them spiritually, governing them in their spiritual life. And so that's one of the things with having elders and deacons. Now we can do more, because when the deacons were trying to do both, you're always dropping the ball somewhere,
Yeah.
or you're only really functioning your operating.
There was the deacon board and the deaconess board.
Right,
Previously,
Yeah.
now there's just one diaconate.
right,
And I got the sense that the deacons were kind of acting more like elders than deacons,
yeah,
or trying to do both, and that
Right.
then it was the deaconesses that were doing
yeah.
the deacon stuff.
Can you explain the difference between an elder and a deacon at our church?
Yeah, just really simply, the deacons take care of the, so if you look at number 11, so number 11, this answers your question, is caring for finances, administration, visitation, physical needs, counseling, and prayer. Now there's some overlap, like elders do, like I do a lot of counseling. Of course the elders and deacons both pray. There's a lot of prayer that's involved. But like an elder meeting now, when the elders get together, just as elders, we talk about the discipleship ministries, the life. Everything okay out there?
Yes.
Okay.
That was really
Could you call it that the elders are plotting strategy and the deacons are doing the tactical things? Look at it like that?
Yeah, in some cases. What we do too is, as elders and deacons, we meet together every few months. We have, like we just met recently at lunch. We had lunch together here after church, met for a few hours, and really touch base on what's coming up. What are the things that are coming up, and what are the roles of the deacons in that? What are the roles of the elders in that? And so there's a lot of interaction between the 2 groups, and it's really healthy. But when the elders get together, like one of the things that we often do is like if somebody's sick, or like people that have cancer or things like that, we call them, and something we do almost every time we get together now is we anoint them and pray for them to be healed. And so that's something we see in James 5. And so we want to implement that as much as we can. So in other words, but though we're focused on really doing the teaching, discipleship, so that all the elders are involved in life groups or discipleship, and mentoring and discipling, especially men as elders. Whereas the deacons are functioning more on the ministries themselves.
Well, if you look at Acts and the very first deacons, it came out of like needing to serve the widows.
Right.
And the people who were doing the preaching and the teaching, the apostles, said, okay, we need to keep doing what we're doing. Now choose some people who can do the service. So the deacons are more servants, and the elders are more teachers.
Yeah, and how it's used in Acts 6 is the church was growing. The church was growing like crazy. People are getting saved left and right. So in order for me to be able to teach and serve those people and help the widows and do it, it's like too much for me or any particular one person. Yeah, yeah.
Doing everything, the
Yeah.
finances, raising money.
Yeah.
And so many
Yeah.
of them have another job. too.
And I don't have a problem with saying no. You know, there's a lot of pastors, and I used to, you know, I mean, I think most people just have to learn that, but you burn yourself out if you don't say no. So there's a lot of things now that I just say no to. And I don't have any guilt over it or anything. It's like, if you think we really need that as a church, it's basically on you. You know, if you want to start a feeding the homeless ministry, I'm not going to do that. Okay, but if you want to do that, have at it. You know, God bless you. We'll pray for you. We'll try to resource you and so forth. But again, there's a lot of people that want certain things without participating in those things. And in our church, we really try to only do a few things well. You know, we believe that if people are here on Sunday and you find out what your spiritual gift is and you can use that on Sunday, that's great, but you might be able to use that in another time of the week in a life group or in discipleship. And then some people are elders and some people are deacons. But our ministry is pretty simple. We try to have a simple church model where Jesus is the head. We've got elders that are overseeing the spiritual life of the church. We have deacons that are overseeing the physical realities of the church, the building, the finances, the sort of the external things. And then everybody else is participating with that in community. Yeah. And it works pretty well. You know, it works pretty well. But again, it all rises or falls on leadership, ultimately. You know, so if you have bad leadership over all that, it's not going to be very good. If you have good leadership, it's going to be good. If you have great leadership, it's going to be great. And so again, the deacon can do anything. The deacons need to have the same qualifications and character qualities of elders, but the difference is they don't have to teach. Whereas elders do have to teach. You have to have the gift. And that doesn't necessarily mean preaching. It could be like somebody leading something like this or facilitating a life group or doing discipleship. Those are all teaching things. And even counseling is teaching to some extent.
Like Mike's been leading the breakfast for the men.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. But again, you don't have to have the gift of teaching to even facilitate a group. But it helps. It helps. Okay. All right. Number 10 was explain Grudem's stance on the phrase husband of one wife.
Not a polygamist, not an adulterer.
Yeah.
Or someone who was remarried.
Right. And again, it's really based on the current status of that relationship. You know, there are certain groups, like I don't know what BSF's policy is now, but it used to be that if you were divorced, you couldn't lead. I don't know if is that still a policy?
It's changed.
It's changed.
There's variables to
That's changed, okay. And some of that is the reality is that there's complications, but let's say you're divorced, but you were a non-believer when you're divorced, and then you got saved and you got remarried. Well, you're a different person. And you were unregenerate, now you're regenerate. So I think there's certain policies that need to be reviewed and really examine what the Bible. But again, I think the issue is that person now a godly man or woman that's following the Lord? And their past is their past. You know, you're forgiven and you can move on. And that's sort of the approach we take. But again, we take an evaluation policy where even Tyrant, when we hired Tyrant, when we put Tyrant on the elder board, he was already qualified as an elder, but he hadn't been a member long enough. And so we had a special meeting to be able to talk about that, and the church unanimously said, let's bring him on. You know, we don't have to wait for this guy because he's already proven himself. And in Tyrant's case, he was already leading a small group, doing discipleship, involved in theology. You know, he was doing like everything that we would want an elder to do. Right. So sometimes there's exceptions to rules and policies, and sometimes we revisit those accordingly. All right, we already looked at the role of the deacon. Let's go to number 12. Why might it be important or helpful to include the whole church in the selection of leaders?
Buy-in.
Yeah, government works best when it's the consent of the governed, more accountability to the congregation.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I came, we only do this for the lead pastor. Okay, the elders actually, like, we recommended Jim. We brought Jim, but he didn't have to candidate in front of the whole church like I did. But when I came, I had to candidate in front of the whole church. I had to preach. I had to teach classes. I had to do different sessions, Q&A, and everything. And then I got voted on. And so in our church, you need a 75% or better vote by the congregation to be called as the senior pastor.
Already left when you came, or was
Yeah. Yeah, he left.
We had an interim.
Yeah, he had Parkinson's, and he just couldn't physically, he just couldn't handle the ministry anymore. Great guy. He was here for 20 years. Guy previous to him was here for 30 years. So I'm only the third pastor in 60 years.
Yeah, this church knows how to pick them. Good picker.
So, but when I came, the church, I can't, the elders don't even decide. They don't say, hey, we want David. No, the whole church decides on it for the role of the lead pastor. And I think that's good. You know, again, because I don't want to come to a place where 50% of you don't want me here. You know, it's like, it's going to be hell, you know. It's going to be a really tough ministry if one out of every two people don't want me here, you know.
It's going to be a tough ministry.
So you want a certain percentage. And even at 70% or whatever it was, there were people that left. There were people that didn't like me, you know. And this church is radically different from when we came. You know, there's very few people that are actually still here from when we first got here. Some of that's death. Some of that's people having to move out of state or whatever. But the church has a very different dynamic today. I think if I were to come today, the vote would be a lot higher for me than it was back then. And again, I was very different than the previous pastor and the people here. It was more of a program-driven church rather than just a disciple-making church. So
it feels like a lot more new people are coming.
Oh yeah, yeah,
That's great.
yeah.
Yeah, George and I were here a year when David came on board.
Okay, when we look at the different kinds of church government, and again, the charts are helpful on this. What page do the charts start on? Somebody can find that. It helps to get the visuals of those. Okay, so page 1136, we have the Episcopal form of government. So you see that in the Episcopal form, you have an archbishop who oversees bishops in a region, and then you have rectors of those specific churches. So if I was in an Episcopal church, I would be the rector, and then I'd have a bishop over me, and then there'd be an archbishop over the bishop. Okay.
And the archbishop and the bishop choose the rector, the congregation
Right.
does not.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, then you have the Presbyterian form of government, where you have the General Assembly that's made up of pastors, essentially. And then you have a presbytery, also made up of, they call them elders. And then under that, you have the session, which would be the part of the elders that are actually in that church, whereas the presbytery would be made up of pastors over the different Presbyterian churches in the particular area. And then you have the congregation under that. So it's sort of like the Episcopalian form, except instead of one archbishop and one bishop, you have a plurality of leaders over a plurality of leaders over a plurality of leaders. So there's more accountability. Okay? Then you have the congregational, and in the congregational there's a few different forms. You have the pastor who's over the congregation, and you have a deacon board. That's on page 1141. So that would be called a single pastor government. That would usually be the case in a small church, you know, like a church of 100 or 200 or less. And then on page 1145, you have the pastor who's part of the deacon board, and that may govern together with or over the congregation, or in some cases the congregation is over that board. So
How would
just
you describe us? How do we fit?
so we are let me see if we have it. Yeah, so if you look at 1146, you have elders and the congregation. And so we're sort of a mix of the two. Like for instance, if we're going to decide on an expenditure over $5,000, our policy is to include the congregation. So like our air conditioning unit, which we still got, I think over $70,000 to raise for. We brought that before the church and said, hey, this is something we need. This system we have is archaic. Sometimes it works. Thank God it worked this week. It's a super hot week.
It was used when it was put
Yeah.
in, so.
So like right now, we don't have air in this building. So that's project number 2, But in the sanctuary, that's our first priority because, of course, that's where the most people gather together on Sundays to worship. So we want to make sure we have air, especially on these 100-degree days. It'd be brutal in there if we didn't have air. But so there's certain things that the whole congregation votes on. When we did church discipline, we didn't bring that in front of the whole church. We brought that to the membership of the church, and we said, hey, this is what we have to do. We're going to have to do church discipline, and here's why. And that ended up working out really well because that person's been restored. So again, there are certain things that we only do with the membership in a business meeting that we all vote on. And the elders usually lead that always lead the meeting, but we include the congregation and we say, hey, do you think this is a good idea? And I don't know that it seems like almost everything we've done in the last 5 years has almost been unanimous. I mean, even our name change was it was just one person didn't vote for it out of our whole membership. So our church is pretty unified in that way. And that's a good tell sign of how unified a church is when you're all voting for something and everybody's like, yeah, we're in, And you don't have anybody that's raising. Even if you have one person raising a stink, that's probably sort of normal. But again, even our church at this point so far, the last few years, our business meetings have been really, gracious and unanimous pretty much, which is great.
Well, some people just like to be contrary.
Yeah.
The church discipline thing.
Yeah.
That's something that I didn't mention when we were talking about number 12 was why is it important for the whole church to be involved in choosing the leaders. When it comes to a point of needing discipline, the congregation needs to be included when it gets to that point.
Yeah.
If it gets to that.
And one of the things, this is coming out all over the place right now. Like there's a lot of big name pastors right now. Robert Morris is one of the big, church of 20,000 in Texas. He's, I haven't been following the story closely, but apparently accused of raping or molesting, and I don't know what the exact deal, but. Here's the thing where this is coming, IHOP, Mike Bickle, big church in Kansas City, influential church. Turns out, there's a slew of women that he was involved with. When that happens, these churches are just devastated. But the sad thing is how often you find out when research is done, like with Ravi Zacharias, same thing, not a church, but a Christian organization, where oftentimes they'll hire a legal group to be able to investigate this, and what they find out is a lot of people knew what was going on, and they shoved it under the carpet. And with our church structure, if a woman had an accusation, and I protect myself, like I don't do counseling with women. When any woman wants to see me, I say, well, you're going to have to see me with my wife. I don't drive women anywhere. I don't meet alone with women anywhere. And I'm protecting myself, and I believe I'm protecting the church by doing that, because if it's a she said, he said in our culture, it depends on who has the best lawyer, but most likely the woman's going to win. Even if I didn't do anything, it could wipe me out of ministry for good. And this happens all the time. So when you have, I use this phrase all the time, people are down on what they're not up on. So we're up on our finances. If anybody wants to know what our finances are, you talk to the treasurer and they'll give you a copy of our financial statement. You can see where every single cent goes to. And we have a very good infrastructure of accountability with our finances. I don't do anything with finances. I don't know who gives. I don't know anything like that. I just know what comes in, what goes out, just like everybody else. But we have people that are on top of all this, and there's accountability. So with our staff, Jim pretty much has the same policies I do. We're very careful. And again, we just believe that's wise. In our culture, you need to take whatever steps you need to be above board. But again, if there was an accusation towards us, hopefully it would never get to the point where it's too late. There's an open forum that is just there for anybody to approach anybody with total transparency. And so if somebody has something against me, or if somebody comes to you, your responsibility as a member, we talked about this in the membership class, is if somebody comes to you and starts complaining about, Dave Craig, this church would be great if it wasn't for David Craig preaching those long sermons, Well, what should you do in that case? Go talk to David. Don't gripe to me about it. Go talk to David.
Stop it right there.
Yeah.
It took a while to get to an hour.
Yeah. Yeah. But again,
It was always there, Gordy.
Yeah.
It was always there.
Yeah. But again, it's just what happens when it happens in a lot of churches is people get shut down. And that's the danger of male rule sometimes, is the men are like a men's club and they don't listen to women. So that's one of the nice things about having women deaconesses is there's a lot of things that guys don't think about, like the nursery. Guys aren't good to put in charge of redecorating a nursery, or a kitchen,
Kitchen, women would have been different.
Yeah, but the mistakes that we have in our building are the result of male decisions. Honestly, they are. And so it's just wise to be able to include women in a lot of the decision making, if not all of the decision making. It's good to have different perspectives and be able to go, oh yeah, that's a good idea. I didn't think of that. Okay, then you had the corporate board. Which that's pretty much the business model. And so a lot of churches have that because, they've learned that just from business. You have a pure democracy where it's congregational rule. And that can be dangerous because, again, you have more in the congregation than you have in the leadership. But if the leadership's right and the congregation's wrong, that's bad. And that's why it's good to have a little bit of give and take on both sides, which we have, to try to protect yourself with that.
Arguments and potential paralysis too.
Right. Yeah. Okay, then no government but the Holy Spirit. Again, that's a disaster waiting to happen, I think.
It sounds very woo-woo.
Yeah. Again, that's just so subjective. And again, even in a marriage between two people, there's times where somebody's got to lead. It's not, co-leadership doesn't always work. Sometimes somebody's got to make the final decision. And it's the same thing in a church. Somebody ultimately has to make a final decision. If it's a plurality that has so like for instance, on our HVAC system, we, as elders and deacons, we believed it was a good idea, but what's the next step? Let's bring it to the congregation. Let's see if they think it's a good idea. And if you guys said, this isn't a good idea, we would have just said, okay, we'll wait. We'll wait till another day. Yeah. But again, I love it that when there's people that ask me to do things and I go, well, that's a deacon board decision. I recently had something I had to bring to a few of the deacons. And not the whole deacon board, because it didn't really involve them all, but the ones that were involved in their particular area of ministry, I was asked by somebody about something. I was able to go to the deacons, who that's their area of ministry, and they were able to make a decision, and I took it back to this person. I'm out of it. I love that. Because in a lot of cases, everybody's mad at the pastor. Well, I told the pastor, he didn't let me do it. Well, now I can go, hey, this is their area. Here, if you got an issue with them, you talk to them. Now, I'm going to back them up. I'm not going to leave them hanging dry. But a lot of decisions now, it's great because the people that are most involved in those areas of ministry get to make those decisions. It gives freedom to the people who are in the know to be able to make the best decisions. And I think it benefits everyone. Okay, number 14. And again, we'll get into this whole women in ministry thing, because again, this is a big chunk of the chapter. I don't know why there weren't very many questions on it.
Yeah.
You'd think there would have been a lot on this, but there wasn't. But anyway, we will talk in our remaining time about women in ministry. But the first question here was, the Bible teaches that women are never to teach the Bible. Is that true or false?
False.
Okay, yeah, that's false. And again, he gave 4 reasons. So what was the first one he gave?
Women are to teach women and children.
Okay, so the first one was explaining the Bible in informal settings. And the example is in Acts 18:26. And let me read that. So this is Apollos speaking in Ephesus, and in verse 26 it says, he began to speak boldly in the synagogue, but when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they took him aside and explained to him the way of God more accurately. So here you have a woman explaining to Apollos something from the Bible. So that's in an informal setting. They actually take them outside. It sounds like they take them outside of the congregation and have a little powwow out there. In our church today, where are women doing that? What informal settings are women doing that?
Life groups?
Life groups, yeah. Every life group has women in them. And any of you are part of a life group, you benefit from what women teach and observe, and wisdom and life experience and so forth. We benefit from that Bible instruction in an informal setting. And again, we have biblical precedent for that, okay? Secondly, a second one was praying and prophesying. So that's 1 Corinthians 11:4. Now, Wayne Grudem actually did his doctoral dissertation on what is biblical prophecy. So when we get to spiritual gifts, he's going to talk about that. But if you want to read his layman's version of his doctoral dissertation, you can get it. You can buy his book. And so he makes a case for what prophecy is and how it's done today. But in 1 Corinthians 11:4, let me start it at verse 1, just to get the context. So Paul says, "Be imitators of me as I am of Christ. Now I commend you because you remember me in everything and maintain the traditions even as I delivered them to you. But I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head. But every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, since it is the same as if her head was shaven." So what was the point that he made in this? Does anybody remember what how he interpreted this? So is this a cultural thing? Is it a principle? I mean, what did he say about this? What's the point just by way of praying and prophesying?
That women pray and prophesy.
Exactly, because if they didn't, he wouldn't have said that they need their head covered. So the covering's a side issue. The issue is, can women pray and prophesy? Well, it's assumed they are, okay? So for a woman to be able to pray in a church. Like we had somebody in our church a few years ago. They've since gone to be with the Lord, but they had a really hard time with women praying in church or reading scripture in church. And why, if we're complementarian, then why do we have women praying in church and why do we have women in the assembly? And so this would be an example that I would give to that person. And they were fine with it. They just didn't know. They were just, hey, if we're trying to be male elders and preachers, why are we having women, speaking in the public assembly when they're supposed to be silent? And again, a lot of the points that are made on both sides of the spectrum oftentimes are just ignorance of properly interpreting what the scriptures actually say. Okay. Number 3 was women teaching women, which is what you said first, Cordy. Mm-hmm. And Titus 2, 3-5 talks about this. So older women likewise are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good. So that's right out there. Women are to teach what is good. And so train the young women to love their husbands and children. Okay? And then it continues. But again, the idea is that women are teaching women, more mature. I don't think it just means you have to be old to do this. I think it's just a mature woman can teach somebody who's maybe and even we can learn from other people that are less mature from us as well, I think. And then the 4th thing was what? Evangelism. Okay, and he used the example. Let's look at John 4:28. I'll start at verse 27. Just then his disciples came back and they marveled that he was talking with a woman, but no one said, "What do you seek?" or "Why are you talking with her?" So the woman left her water jar and went away into town and said to the people, "Come, see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ?" And they went out of the town and were coming to him. So she immediately went to talk about her experience with Christ. And that wasn't frowned upon. That was actually a good thing.
That was a Samaritan woman?
Mm-hmm, yeah. And then he gave the example from Matthew 28 as well. But again, we try to implement women as much as possible, especially with their gifts. So like usually on Christmas Eve or our Good Friday service, we almost always have women reading scripture. We have women pray regularly, publicly. No problem with a woman doing anything except preaching. Okay, while I'm here, we're not going to have a woman preaching. That's an area where we just think is off limits biblically. Okay, we make the case biblically for that.
Well, Grudem says that on 1151, right? He concludes the Bible does not permit women to function in the roles of pastor or elder.
Right. Yeah.
But all those other things.
Right. Okay, so with that in mind, when you look at, yeah, go ahead.
I had one thing that
Yeah.
I thought was quite interesting.
Okay.
On page 1163, and it was number 10 there, of objections.
Okay.
And I thought this was very interesting. Number 10 says, most of these alternative views of 1 Timothy 2:12 have arisen since 1966.
Right.
And he says, as far as I can determine, most of the previous 8 objections to saying that 1 Timothy 2:12 prohibits women from teaching or having authority over men today have arisen in the published academic literature since 1966. This doesn't automatically mean that objections are incorrect, but it does cast some doubt on them. If any of these interpretations are correct, so why didn't one think of them for so many centuries?
Right.
Why did they arise soon after secular feminism gained widespread influence in society in the 60s? So I thought that was really an important point to bring up.
Yeah, it's huge. And again, I think it completely annihilates any position contrary to complementarianism. Because again, the bottom line reason is the encroachment of feminism on the church. That's the bottom line. It isn't that everybody's always interpreted it incorrectly. It's, okay, if we're going to be relevant in this world today, in the 21st century, then we have to be like the world. And I just think that's a really bad argument for anything, whatever that entails. And all the things that entails have been really bad for the church. Sexuality is a huge issue in regards to that. But again, it's been devastating for the ethics and morality of the church. And it makes the church impure in a culture that's already incredibly impure. And if there's no distinction between the church and the world, then what's the point, you know?
And the church is supposed to bring light to the world.
Yeah.
And the world, instead of the world coming in and putting the light out in the church. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really an important thing.
So that was one of the, on number 17 on page 207, compare and contrast the egalitarian and complementarian views on women in church offices. Which arguments do you find most persuasive on either side? So Dana, I'm taking it that would have been one of the more persuasive arguments for you. Anything else from any of you for either side?
Complementarianism, the man is to be the leader in the home, therefore in the church family, as Christ leads the church. Women are to submit to their husbands as to Christ, therefore to submit in the church. And what better way to model submission in the home is to submit to the church government.
Okay. Good.
And as George's Alzheimer's became worse, he had such a hard time making any decision.
Yeah.
What do you want for dinner?
Right.
I had to start making decisions that I wanted input on.
Right.
And I wasn't getting a lot. And it was hard to shift my role.
Yeah.
But it was imposed on me.
Yeah. Well, I think there are complicated issues as far as like with a woman that's married to a non-believer. Because there's a lot of women that are way more spiritually mature and know the Bible, and they're saved, and their husband isn't. How does that work? So there's a lot of practical areas that aren't super black and white. But when it is black and white, like when they both are Christians, it should be that the man is leading spiritually in the home. But that's not always possible. That's not always the case.
And
yeah.
that was our case when you had cancer.
Right.
And
Yeah, same thing. Yeah. Yeah, sort of like what Cordy was saying. But again, both of you,
As soon as it ended, you
Yeah.
were back.
Right.
to-
But in both your cases, you're both women of the Word. You know the Word, and you're both, have a humble attitude towards what does God want me to be and do. Whereas I think that what I see oftentimes is, like, I'm not going to come down on a woman that's in a third world area where she's the only, there's only a bunch of women that are saved in their area. Who's going to teach on Sundays? So am I going to hammer, you shouldn't do this, you can't do this? Probably not. But I would say that, hey, one thing you could be praying for is that one of the guys in your village or one of your husbands becomes a Christian, and that he would. And there was there was a missions example. Yeah, what page was that on? Anyway, if someone can be looking for that.
I did too much.
But it was an example of on the mission field, and a woman's basically steps. I don't know. It was a Wycliffe example. Yeah, I don't know. There's so many pages here. It's hard to find. Any other objections or arguments that were persuasive to any of you on either side? This is a big issue. Again, I think this is the biggest issue today in churches. The role of the man and the woman in the church, in the home, and so forth. Again, we take the same position Grudem does. Wayne Grudem is sort of at the forefront of the complementarian movement along with John Piper. They wrote a book that's almost this big on every issue related to women and men you can think of.
A friend of mine in Tennessee's church is going through a controversy right now, in quotes. In the past, the person who led worship was always a man and always an elder.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're trying to decide whether it would be okay to have a woman leading the worship, and because they want to make sure that the person leading the worship is because the person leading the worship has always in the past been an elder, doesn't mean necessarily that the person leading the worship must be a pastor or an elder. And so they're kind of like, does this person have to be an elder or not?
Yeah.
Do we have a woman leading the music or not? And they're trying to tease that out.
Yeah, so like in our church, we're complementarian, but Lynn is our primary worship leader. However, like, to give you an example though, Lynn, like if Lynn's going to do something, she always contacts, if she's going to change things up or do something differently or add a song or take away a song, I've had to approach her and say, hey, I don't think we should do this song. It's not heretical, but the ministry that does this music is heretical. So we don't do Hillsong, we don't do Elevation, we don't do Bethel, because all those ministries are heretical. So we don't want to be associated with them. So even if they have some good songs, and they do, there's too many other good ministries and good hymns and good praise songs out there that we don't need to rely on those ones to be able to sing. So, but Lynn is always very humble and teachable. And if I ask her to do something, she no questions asked. She just said, okay,
It's that model of submission.
It is, yeah.
That we're talking about.
Yeah. And again, Lynn is very gifted. It would be, I mean, can you imagine if she wasn't doing what she's doing? I think that would be a huge mistake on our part. So we're allowing Lynn to use her gifts, but again, Lynn's attitude is that God gets the glory. And that's, again, that comes down to that issue is who's getting the glory? Why are you doing what you're doing? Is it about you or is it about God? And those are important questions to ask in relationship to all these things. Did you find it?
I did.
Oh yeah, what page was it on?
1156.
Okay.
At the bottom, the history of missions, as many stories of courageous women.
Okay. Yeah, let me read this because you can hear it on the video better when I read it. So the history of mission, bottom of page 1156. The history of missions has many stories of courageous women who went by themselves to proclaim the gospel to unreached people. For example, Wycliffe Bible translator Joanne Shetler tells a beautiful story of her work with the Balango people in the Philippines and her interaction with a man in the village, her daddy, who had adopted her into his family and who was reading pages of the New Testament for her as she produced it. I continued translating in Timothy with my daddy, and we came to a verse where Paul says to Timothy, I don't allow women to teach men. My daddy didn't bat an eyelash, but that afternoon, after we'd finished work, he said to me, "Now what is it that we're going to study on Sunday?" I thought he was just curious. I didn't know what was on his mind since fathers don't report to their children. So I told him. Sunday morning came, and before I could stand up to start, he stood up and said, "My daughter here knows more about this than I do, but we found in the Bible that women aren't supposed to teach men. So I guess I'm going to have to be the one." And that was the end of my career and the beginning of their teaching. Yeah. And again, there's a lot of stories like this all over the world. I interviewed at a church in Arizona where there were 10 elders. 2 of them were women. One of the women resisted me, and the other was actually glad I was there. And she said, "I always thought there was something wrong about me being an elder. I just wanted to serve in the church." And her attitude told me everything I needed to know about her. She, whatever her gifts are, she needs to use them. And she did. But the other woman, it was all about her agenda. And I'm right, you're wrong, you're a jerk, I'm great. And that was her attitude. And it took that church down. That person took that church down. So that's on her. She's going to have to face God on Judgment Day for that. And, so again, it's a lot of all of this, it's when you do things God's way, it works really well. Okay? That's the way it works. It works well when you do things God's way. If you go against God's way, there's severe consequences. And that's what we're seeing. And that's why the church, I think, is so ineffective in the Western world today, overall, is because we have compromised our position on men and women in ministry, and it's bit us in the butt. And it's going to continue to do so until we get this thing right.
Is that part of what makes those other churches heretical that you were mentioning before?
It's one of them. It's one of them. I mean, what all those churches have in common is they do have women pastors. Yeah, all those heretical churches, yeah. And again, a complementarian church, by and large, if you look at complementarian churches, they tend to grow and they tend to do pretty well. Now again, there's abuse in some of those, unfortunately, but abuse you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. You don't go, we're going to go total egalitarian because of the abuse of certain complementarians. No, I mean, the complementarians are just as, that's sinful. If men are abusing women, that's sinful and it needs to be dealt with. But it doesn't mean you throw out the baby with the bathwater. Like, I think our church is a good model of complementarianism. I really do. I would defend what we do over against anyone. I would put us on board with anyone. As far as I think we have a really solid infrastructure. We just need more. We need more leaders. We need more people of character and quality to be able to fill those positions because we could accomplish more. But we're not going to put somebody who's not qualified in a position just because we need more people. We're going to pray about that. We're going to try to train people. We're going to try to raise people up to do that, but we're not going to compromise. I think you're always better waiting for something than compromising. A lot of us can say that the worst financial decisions I've made in life is when I did it too fast. It's like, I got to get this now. I can't wait, and then you do it. And it's like, oh, what did I do? It's like, oh no, And so it's the same thing. I mean, the worst decisions I've made in ministry is putting somebody in leadership that they really shouldn't have never been in there for. And when you got to fire them, it's so much easier to hire somebody than it is to fire somebody. Yeah, but when you got to fire somebody, it's brutal. And but sometimes you have to. They're just not doing their thing. Okay, we got 5 more minutes. So any other I
just thought that was a really great chapter.
Yeah.
I learned a lot.
Could have been a whole chapter just on women.
Yeah, either of those could have been 2 full chapters for sure.
Yeah. I thought that the 18 was an interesting question. Before reading the chapter ahead, I thought about the biblical model.
Uh-huh.
And based on the reading of the chapter, has your opinion on the subject changed? Well, I have thought about it because I'm just old. And my opinion hasn't changed. However, the recent news and the SBC
Right.
and
Yeah, it's a
the United
big deal.
Methodist
Right. Right.
has really solidified the
Yeah. Yeah.
that the
Yeah.
complementarianism.
Yeah, two huge newsworthy issues. United Methodist Church is dealing with this. The Southern Baptist is and again, a lot of the church splits that have led to conservative and liberal branches of all these, even Baptists. American Baptist is liberal, for instance.
Yeah.
These splits are over these issues. Primarily women in ministry, but it also involves same-sex marriage and things like that too. But again, where it starts, once you get away from complementarianism, if a church becomes egalitarian, I don't know what the stats are, but once if our church as complementarian becomes egalitarian, we hire a woman pastor, we have a women elder. What happens next is same-sex marriage is allowed, or a lesbian or gay pastor is ordained in the church. That's that always happens next. Now, there's a lot of churches out there that are egalitarian and they're not same-sex and they're not pro-gay. But once you've taken a step away from complementarianism, the step becomes shorter to the next area. And it happens all the time. All the time. Yeah.
It's like they haven't taken that step yet.
Yeah.
Right, they're just not.
And again, the first step is a little bit more debatable biblically. Mm-hmm. The second step isn't debatable at all. It is a flat out cultural buy-in.
Yeah.
Okay?
Absolutely.
And completely going against what the Bible says. I have to say that with egalitarians, they have some good points. I don't think they're right. I don't think they're good. I don't think they're great points, but they do have some good points. And there are plenty of women out there that have the egalitarian position that I learned from. He talked about reading commentaries. I mean, there's a lot of commentaries of a lot of women scholars that have their PhDs in New Testament, Old Testament. They're way smarter than I am. They know their Bibles better than I do. But they're egalitarian. And they could be preaching in their churches. I would still struggle with that. But if I had one of those women in our church, she would definitely be teaching. She would be teaching a class like that. I wouldn't have any problem with that. Well, but she would have to be under the authority of the elders.
I really see, Jody teaching at BSF is
well, and even mentioned Bible Study Fellowship.
But even Jody would never, she wouldn't feel comfortable and she wouldn't preach in our church. She's and she even leading BSF constantly comes to me with questions and wanting resources and what have you. She has a teachable, humble spirit. Again, gifted teacher, brilliant,
brilliant person.
Incredibly gifted, but again, she sees herself as under the authority of her husband in the home and under the authority of the eldership in the church, and I think that's the proper perspective.